Courtney.
I'm Brian.
And this is The Primary Nerd. Welcome, everyone. I'm Courtney, and I'm joined by my co-host, Brian.
Hey, everybody.
And this is Titanic Episode 9.
Yay! We got here. Oh, it has
Thank
been...
goodness.
It has been a busy holiday season.
I was trying to think. I think the last time we recorded was September.
It could have been, but when we were ramping up to Thanksgiving, things got crazy. So,
but also in the meantime, we had the opportunity to go to the Titanic Museum.
We did,
and in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee.
That was excellent. There were so many exciting things to see that really helped us get a good feel for the Titanic and what people experienced on the Titanic. That was
and
really
there were
cool.
some great little stories, because you can read all the books and be on the websites, but because they have so many artifacts and whatnot, there was all these little details that I had never learned before that I was able to see and kind of take in and be like, I'd never heard this story. I had never had this tidbit. So I'm going to be able to incorporate a lot of that information in to our overall narrative, as well as quite a few images.
Oh, yes. And also while we were working so hard on these episodes, we also got our YouTube channel up and going. It is the Primary Nerd Podcast YouTube channel.
So excited.
We are going to use that for rabbit trails and things where we can just kind of, if we put a pin on it here, we'll go there and we'll do a little rant or
because there's so many interesting kind of, like you said, rabbit trails, that it doesn't necessarily, if we put them all into the overall narrative, it would take forever.
Yes.
And so it's like, we can't really get into this because we got to keep it moving. But if it's like, you want to know about the Titanic kitchens, or, my gosh, we could get into, there's so many cruise stories, and there's so many little stories about the passengers that I would love to be able to share about them specifically, and more getting to know who they were as people.
Oh yeah. So, and if you're wondering what we look like, well, there's a short little snippet from the museum there. So go check it out. It's the Primary Nerd Podcast. It's a YouTube channel. So, and why don't you tell our listeners about your exciting, the Romantic English promo?
So I'm very excited about this. And as y'all know, I love history. And actually a year ago, I had the opportunity to go to London. And I just fell in love with the tapestries that we saw over there. And there was this great shop on Etsy called Romantic English. And I had a specific idea in mind, so I reached out to the owner to ask him if this is something that he could create for me. And in the kind of back and forth conversation or whatnot, the podcast came up. He started listening, and he was like, I love what you're doing. I love your content, and I would really like to support the show. So he has extended a promo code specifically for us. It is NERD30, NERD 30, for 30% off.
Wow.
And we're talking legit. He's got legitimate woven tapestries. He's got some that are more like fabric prints. If you're a Potterhead, like you're a Harry Potter fan, there's a bunch of them that you would have seen in the Harry Potter common rooms. Potterhead. That's a thing. Don't judge me.
Like a poop deck.
No. No. I apologize to any Potterheads out there. He doesn't know what he's saying. It's fine. So he's giving us this exclusive discount. And he had even said, he goes, I don't usually give discounts. I don't even really do seasonal sales, because he's looking at expanding his catalog to offer more historical reproductions. However, he has given this incredibly generous offer to the Primary Nerd Podcast because he wants to support our content.
So once again, the promo code is NERD30. That's NERD 30 for 30% off.
And the Etsy shop is called Romantic English.
And they're very cool looking tapestries.
Oh, mine arrived, and I had to put it up immediately. Now, whenever somebody comes to my house, it's like, come, must see my tapestry.
Yeah, and so hopefully we will, as we get going more on our YouTube channel, we're going to have some of those, our backdrops, so you'll be able to see some of the wonderful work that has been done at that you can get from that shop.
Absolutely. So that really concludes the business that we have. So, where we left off last episode, we have been discussing the chaos and disorganization that characterized the port lifeboat neighborhoods on Titanic. A major factor in that chaos was the sheer number of people crowding the port side. And after the launching of boats number 8 and 6, that crowd swelled even more as third-class passengers finally made their way up to the boat deck. But there are enduring questions surrounding how the third-class passengers access the boat deck. More specifically, why it took them so long, and if they were prevented or delayed in any way. So for this episode, before we continue to discuss the launching of the remaining port lifeboats, we will listen to the voices of the third-class survivors as they describe how they experienced the collision, what information they were told and when, and if there were any obstacles that prevented them from accessing the lifeboats.
So we're going to be listening to the survivors.
Yes.
Very good.
Yes. So I cannot begin to tell you how excited I am to dive into this part of the Titanic story. The third-class passengers received very little voice in the newspapers or the U.S. Senate Titanic inquiry, and absolutely no voice in the British Wreck Commissioner's inquiry. So as we go through this episode, keep in mind the voices you hear today are from those that survived. And in the third class, for every one person who survived, 3 did not.
Oh my goodness.
So let's go back in time.
Before we dive into the third-class passengers' individual stories, let's talk about them as a group first. When Titanic departed Queenstown, Ireland, there were 710 people on board carrying third-class tickets. While the passengers traveling in first or second class were predominantly American or British, and therefore native English speakers, the passengers traveling third class were comprised of many different nationalities, and the majority did not speak English as their first language. This means if they were walking through one of the third-class passenger public areas, we would have heard a cacophony of accents and languages, including, but not limited to, American, Canadian, British, Irish, Norwegian, Danish, Finnish, Swedish, Swiss, German, French, Italian, Portuguese, Greek, Syrian, Turkish, Russian, and Chinese.
That is a very long list.
Hey, my nationality's on there. Finnish. That's way cool. I didn't realize that there were Finns that were traveling across.
There's so many people, so many different nationalities and different backgrounds that were coming over to America at that time.
That is a very large group. I didn't realize that.
Yes. So speaking of the third-class public areas, let's talk about the amenities that this group of passengers enjoyed while on Titanic. Now, as we move down through the decks, keep in mind that the third-class accommodations and amenities would have been located at the extreme far ends of the ship, i.e. either near the bow or near the stern. These were not the most desirable locations on board because of the noise and vibration. The most stable section was amidships and therefore reserved for first-class passengers. The second class was housed just outside amidships, not quite as stable as first class, not quite so unstable as third. Now, most of the third-class amenities were located on shelter deck C or below. However, one of the third-class promenades was located as high as bridge deck B. On the image that we've talked about a couple times, it's on our website where it's the side view of Titanic. And if you look at the stern end of the ship, you will notice an elevated deck at the very end. This is the poop deck. I know. We've talked about the poop deck a couple times.
So makes me laugh.
I know. It's cute. So it served dual purposes. Number one, as a working deck that housed 2 of the ship's electric cargo cranes. And number 2, as an open promenade where third-class passengers could enjoy sunshine, fresh air, and an unobstructed view of the ocean. Because third-class passengers were not able to reserve deck chairs like first and second-class passengers, the only seating available were wooden benches secured to the decking.
And if you descended the stairs from the poop deck, you would find yourself in the afterwell deck area of shelter deck C. Much of it was comprised of cargo hatches and cargo handling equipment, but the remaining open space was considered part of the third-class promenade. There was another such third-class promenade on the forward well deck.
Which, let's be real, we're putting some big air quotes in here because the first class gets to have their covered promenade with the deck chairs. They have blankets available to them that they could rent. They called them rugs. And even the second class, they were able to reserve chairs. This is a place that is reserved for them and reserved for their comfort. This is open space that they happen to be walking around heavy equipment
and cargo hatches.
Yeah, and the White Star Line is like, yeah, that's your promenade guy.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like much of a promenade.
No, so there's a great big air quotes here.
Yes, I see that. On shelter deck C, under the poop deck, was the third-class entrance. If you were standing in the foyer of the third-class entrance, you would see a wide companionway comprised of 4 staircases leading to the decks below. This is the aft third-class companionway, which operated as the main thoroughfare for third-class passengers from Shelter Deck C all the way down to Lower Deck G.
Yeah, we've talked about this a couple of times, but just to refresh, the term companionway is used to describe staircases, hallways, corridors, basically any space through which a passenger got from one location to another. Titanic was designed in such a way that a particular class's companionways would only lead them to the accommodations and amenities intended for them. Conversely, it prevented them from accessing anything outside their designated area. The main takeaway? It was not possible for third-class passengers to freely travel between decks. This design will prove fatal the night of the collision, as third-class passengers attempted to access the first and second-class decks where the lifeboats were being loaded. So back to the third-class entrance. So if we were out on that afterwell deck, we've come off of the poop deck, we've walked down the stairs, we're in that little middle section, and we turn around and you look under the poop deck. That's where you would see your third class entrance. If we walk inside of it, we could go down the stairs, or there are two doors, one on either side of the companionway. The door to the left led to the third-class smoke room, which was a men-only space. The door to the right led to the third-class general room, where all passengers, regardless of gender, could socialize and relax. They even had an upright piano.
Oh, wow.
There's a lot of accounts that talk about this piano.
Mm-hmm.
The decor of both rooms was very Spartan when compared to first class, but it seems rather cheerful and bright. There were white enamel walls, red and white tiled floors, portholes for the windows, wooden benches, and some scattered tables and chairs with live potted plants.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, that upright piano. Your grandmother had an upright. Mm-hmm. She used to love playing her upright piano.
I have that upright piano.
You do have that upright piano. That's very cool. So let's explore the rest of the third class amenities as we descend the companionway. The next deck down was Saloon Deck D. There were very few third-class cabins on this level, and they were all located near the stern. This deck also housed extensive public restrooms for both men and women, as well as the only 2 bathtubs available to third-class passengers. Can you imagine having to share 2 bathtubs among 710 people?
I don't even want to think about that.
That is mind-boggling.
Now, one of the reasons for that, we found this out actually at the museum, was because there was this belief that to bathe too often was actually bad for your health.
That's right.
Yes, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but in the cabins, they had wash basins. So the idea was that way you can wash your hands, wash your face, but to fully immerse yourself and bathe too regularly, they thought that you could die. You could become sick and die.
Interesting. Yeah, I do vaguely remember something about that. So, And then continuing on, at the forward end of Saloon Deck D was the third-class open space, which was very similar to the third-class general room in both decor and function, and included access to a third-class bar.
Most of the third-class cabins were located both forward and aft on upper decks E, middle deck F, and lower deck G. For the sake of propriety, single men were housed near the bow, while single women and family groups were quartered at the complete opposite end of the ship near the stern.
For propriety. Keeping them separate.
Yes. Well, so it would have been a moral issue. It also would have been a safety issue. Mm-hmm. And the White Star Line used this as part of their as a promotion for themselves, as for single women that were traveling alone.
Oh, for safety.
For safety reasons.
Interesting.
Exactly.
Okay.
Middle Deck F also contained the third-class dining saloon and supporting third-class galley and pantries, i.e. the kitchen and the food storage. So let's talk about the third-class cabins, sometimes referred to as berths, B-E-R-T-H-S. There was no such thing as a private room in third class. All the cabins contained either 2, 4, or 6 berths, with a 2-tier bunk bed configuration. All cabins had wash basins with a freshwater tank above, which was filled by the stewards. It was also standard for the third-class cabins to contain mirrors and wall seats, which is exactly what it sounds like. Mm-hmm. So it's something that, picture like a Murphy bed.
A Murphy bed, yes.
So it's something that is up into the wall, and then you can kind of fold it down, and there would be straps on either side. Because keep in mind, in the first-class cabins, they would have had sofas and nice chairs, etc. There just wasn't room for it in those little third-class cabins, which they had a mock-up at the museum.
We saw they were very small.
They're how big did you think it was?
Oh, I was going to say there were 2. There was a bunk bed on the left side, the right side, and an aisle in the middle. I'd say the aisle couldn't have been more than 3 feet wide, maybe 3.5 if that, maybe. So you had bunk bed, 3 foot, and then another bunk bed. So the room itself couldn't have been more than 9 or 10 feet wide, if that.
So not all the cabins would even. So if you had
Not
a
even
wall
that big.
seat, it would be probably a 2-berth room would have a wall seat. But if you had it was 4 or 6, there's no way you could. And so if you look in the pictures of the cabins, I was kind of like, wait a second, is that a toilet? Like I was very confused because it's white porcelain down below, which looks like a sink, but then there's also white porcelain up above. So it kind of looks like a toilet tank and a bowl. But this is actually the wash basin down below, and it's the freshwater tank up above so that they can have the water to wash their hands and wash their face.
Oh, I'm glad you said that because I thought, man, were they flushing down to that bowl to wash
No.
their hands?
No. But I wanted to clarify this because I, for the longest time, was like, what is happening
Well,
here?
that's good. I'm glad because I thought that when I saw that in that mock-up, I thought, well, that's kind of a strange place to wash your hands.
Alrighty then. No. So just as there were no private rooms in third class, neither were there private toilets. All restrooms were public and separated by gender, although some sources do say that there were chamber pots in the cabins.
That's what I was thinking. When I saw that, I thought maybe it was a chamber pot, but I thought it'd be kind of odd having 3 other people in there while you're using a chamber pot.
I assume this is kind of like when you're camping in a trailer. You don't really want to use it, but you use it if you absolutely have to. But they had really extensive bathroom facilities near the stern.
No, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So now that we've taken a tour of the third class amenities and accommodations, let's fast forward to Sunday, April 14th, 1912. The day dawned sunny and bright, but bitterly cold. Sunday religious services were held in the morning, followed by the midday meal. As you can imagine, the meals served in third class were very different from those served in first and second class. For instance, the largest third class meal was served at midday, with a savory tea served in the late afternoon. Conversely, the first and second class passengers' largest meal was the evening dinner. A recovered menu from the night of Sunday, April 14th, showed that 11 courses were served in first class and 3 courses were served in second class.
Can you imagine?
Wow. Now. Yeah.
I kind of wonder if they didn't do the biggest meal for third class because they needed to be able to focus on the huge evening meals for first and second. Now that's just totally conjecture on my part, but why else would you do that?
Well, if you think about, I'm not much on frontier dining or what it was like back in, 100 years ago or 200 years ago, but stories I've read and movies I've watched, they always talked about the midday meal being supper, being large, because they were working.
Well, maybe that's exactly what
it
is.
was working, and then dinner may have been lighter. I don't know. I mean, it could have had something to do with culture. It could have had something to do with class. I mean,
you know what this would be great for? Our podcast, our YouTube channel.
Yeah, YouTube channel. Yeah,
let's do this on the YouTube
we'll
channel.
Have to look into the history of people and how they eat and when they eat.
Mm-hmm. And we can specifically look at it from Titanic, or we can do something more broad. Sure. But I actually have a book that's called The Last Meal on Titanic. So it has the menus and what they ate and all of the recipes and the drinks. Mm-hmm. So that would be fun. We should put a pin in that.
Okay. Let's pin it.
So the third-class passengers' dining experience may have differed from the 2 upper classes, but it was still quite luxurious in comparison to what was offered on other liners. According to historians Archbold and Macaulay in their book Last Dinner on Titanic, there it is, quote, although Spartan, the third-class dining room located amidships on F deck was a vast improvement over the dining facilities steerage passengers had come to expect. White Star realized that for all the glitter of first class, the bread and butter of its transatlantic run would be the many thousands of working-class Europeans wanting to immigrate to the rapidly expanding economies of North America. Actually, there were 2 third-class dining rooms. In each, the white enameled walls were enlivened by colorful framed White Star posters, and the tables were set with linen tablecloths and waited on by stewards. Third class had its own kitchen where the hearty, nourishing meals were prepared.
That sounds good. Nourishing.
This is also the 2 different third-class dining rooms. Mm-hmm. One is for the women, the single women and the families. The other is for the single men.
Oh, and actually I can see that. If you were a young woman and you were traveling by yourself or a woman traveling by yourself, you'd want safety and to have that ability to be able to have a place where you could feel safe.
Yeah, to be kind of removed
from. Yeah.
And now I do want to be clear, the single men did get to still socialize with the rest of the third-class passengers, especially in the open space, in the general room, stuff like that. There seemed to be certain places that they separated them out.
For certain things they separated. That makes sense.
And also for a lot of these people, it says they were waited on by stewards. Chances are they had never been waited on by anybody.
That's true. That's a good point. So after the midday meal, some passengers ventured out into the open promenades, only to discover that the temperature was hovering around 48 degrees and a stiff wind had picked up. Most decided that it was far too windy and cold to remain outside, so they spent the rest of the afternoon and evening in the public rooms. Historians Fitch, Leighton, and Wormstead gave this fantastic description in their book On a Sea of Glass. Quote, overall, things in third class were quite cheery, with a general optimism for better lives in America among the steerage passengers. Spirits were high and the mood was festive. There was an impromptu party in the third class general room that evening, with a lot of music and dancing. Eugene Daly moved about the room playing lively tunes on his
Okay.
Uilleann? Uilleann?
So it's Uilleann.
They're pipes.
They are pipes. I think it's Uilleann or Uilleann, maybe?
It's a pipe. Okay, Uilleann.
Okay, pause for a second. So Eugene Daly moved about the room playing lively tunes on his pipes. Apparently, this is the Irish version of a bagpipe. Because I looked it up. So
cool.
the Irish people, they sit with it, where apparently the Scottish bagpipes, you stand. And it has a different, music, it has a different tone of the instrument, in case anybody was ever curious.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, because bagpipe. I like bagpipes. That's way cool. And then Katie, continuing with the quote, Katie Gilna later said that the trip was a delight. She recalled seeing a rat scurry across the room during the party while the boys giving chase and the girls squealing with delight.
It's just good old-fashioned fun.
just
saying.
Following a rat.
So the third-class party in the movie was real.
Yeah.
When Rose goes down with Jack and they're partying it up downstairs or whatnot, this was real. By the way, it's my opinion that these sort of parties would have been held in the third-class open space, which is located forward on Saloon Deck D. Just taking a look at what it was in the movie. That's what I think that they meant for it to be.
Gotcha. And then also just keep in mind that 48 degrees is only 8 degrees warmer than the highest setting in your refrigerator. So your fridge is designed to operate no more than, it's like 30 to 40 degrees.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so 48 degrees, you're getting almost close to refrigerator.
It's getting nippy.
It's getting cold.
Third-class passenger Julius Sapp described Titanic's last day as follows, quote, it was Sunday, a really festive day. Everyone was happy. Even our small number of Belgians were together and satisfied. There was music from the morning until the evening, and the ship was beautifully joyous when we went to our rooms. The third class always had to go down earlier. Now, what he's saying with this, having to go down earlier, is the fact that there was an earlier curfew imposed upon the third-class passengers. Some of the first-class public rooms were open as late as 11:30, but the lights were turned off in the third-class public rooms at 10.
Interesting.
Before curfew began, third-class passenger Charles Daw took a turn around the deck. He later wrote, quote, from the time we left Southampton on Wednesday afternoon until Sunday evening, our voyage was uneventful. I was walking on the deck with other friends at 9:30 Sunday evening. I remarked to a lady and her husband that we must be very close to icebergs, as the weather had turned so cold. We all went into the saloon. I had a smoke and returned to my cabin and retired.
Interesting. So they went to an hour and a half earlier on their curfew. I mean, they were saying that they would close the public rooms at 10.
I would really like to know why.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I don't know. I'll look into that.
Let's look into that. So this brings us to 10 p.m. on Sunday, April 14th, 1912. The collision is only 1 hour and 40 minutes away.
No, time is ticking down.
Given the amount of time between curfew and the collision, most agree that the third-class passengers were asleep when Titanic hit the iceberg. As we discuss the experiences of the third-class passengers, you will notice certain similarities between their accounts and those of the first and second-class passengers that we have discussed in previous episodes. Like their upper-class counterparts, the third-class passengers who heard or felt the collision for themselves either ignored it, questioned their stewards about it, or began to investigate for themselves and possibly warn others. However, there is an additional category specific to the third class. Some were shocked to find water in their cabins or even in their beds.
Third-class passenger Joseph Abraham Hyman was traveling from Manchester, England to visit his brother in America. The story of his survival was printed in the New York Herald. Quote, Sunday night I sat chatting with several other passengers and went to bed a few minutes after 10 o'clock. It must have been about 11:30 when I was awakened by a terrible shock. There was only one, just a bang and a rip, lasting a few seconds. Then everything was quiet. I didn't know what had happened, but never dreamed it could be anything serious, so I lay in my bunk for 20 minutes listening. I could hear doors banging and passengers running to and fro, asking what was the matter. Someone said everything was all right, but some were afraid.
According to historian George Behe, third-class passenger Eugene Daly saved up his money for 14 years to have enough to immigrate to the United States. Eugene later wrote this letter to his family in Ireland, quote, "I was in compartment 23, deck C steerage. 2 other men were with me. I was in my bunk asleep on the Sunday night, the night of the disaster. A crash waked me up and nearly threw me from my bed. I got up and went to the door. I met the steward in the gangway. He said there was nothing serious and that I might go back."
The following quote from On a Sea of Glass by Fitch, Layton, and Wormstead encapsulates the danger of this advice, no matter how innocently given. Quote, During the minutes directly following the collision in first, second, and third classes, both above and below deck, not only were the passengers being assured nothing serious had happened, but they were also being told to go back to their staterooms and to go back to sleep. It is possible that for some of those who went back to sleep, particularly those in third-class sections of the ship forward, this delay subsequently allowed them to become trapped by incoming water or without enough time to save themselves.
Despite the bedroom steward's assurances, certain third-class passengers began alerting one another to the possible danger. A great example of this is third-class passenger Olaus Albaceth. By the time Atlantic sailed, he was already an experienced transatlantic traveler. He had immigrated to America at the age of 14, then returned to Norway in 1911 to visit his family. When it was time for Olaus to go back to America, several of his friends and family decided to accompany him. Of the 6 traveling on Titanic, only 3 survived. Olaus wrote the following letter to his father and uncle, quote, "At 12 o'clock at night on the 15th April, we struck an iceberg. We went up on deck, where we were already a lot of people. I asked one of the crew if there was any danger. He answered, 'No, you are quite safe.' I then went down to Peter and Sigurd, who were sharing a cabin, and told them what had happened and that it would be wise to get up."
So let's compare this part of Olaus's story to what he said during the U.S. Senate inquiry. Quote, "I went to bed about 10 o'clock Sunday night, and I think it was about 15 minutes to 12 when I woke up. And there was another man in the same room, 2 of us in the same room, and he said, 'What is that?' I said, 'I don't know, but we'd better get up.' So we did get up and put our clothes on, and we too went up on deck in the forward part of the ship. Then there was quite a lot of ice on the starboard side of the ship. They wanted us to go down again, and I saw one of the officers, and I said to him, 'Is there any danger?' He said no. I was not satisfied with that, however, so I went down and told my brother-in-law and my cousin, who were in the same compartment there. They were not in this... Wait, hold on. I went down and told my brother-in-law and my cousin, who were in the same compartment there, they were not in the same room." Okay, so what he's saying is the cabins, there's various cabins that comprise a compartment. Okay, sorry, took me a second. But they were just a little ways from where I was. I told them about what was happening, and I said they'd better get up. Both of them got up and dressed, and we took our overcoats and put them on. We did not take any life belts with us. There was no water on deck at that time. So I'd like to highlight that something that Olaus said in this excerpt. We too went up on deck in the forward part of the ship. This seemingly small piece of information is absolutely crucial. According to most secondary sources, there's only one third-class staircase or companionway, which was located all the way aft near the ship's stern. I first learned this factoid from Tom McCluskey. Reminder, he was the archive manager at the shipbuilding company that had designed and constructed Titanic. He also authored Anatomy of the Titanic. And this same factoid has been reinforced by most other Titanic historians. I've seen it in YouTube videos. It's pretty common.
Okay.
However, as I was reading through the primary sources, I discovered there were other smaller companionways near the bow, which allowed the passengers berthed forward on decks E, F, and G to access other decks without having to walk all the way aft to use the main companionway. Because keep in mind, to go from the forward to the stern where that main companionway would have been is literally 1/6 of a mile. What did we say that she's like 890 feet long?
900 feet long.
Okay, so I actually looked this up once because I was like, people keep saying 1/6 of a mile. And I was like, but how accurate is this? So I actually looked up the amount of feet in a mile, and then I divided it by 6, and it darn near perfectly equals the length of Titanic.
There you go.
So anyway.
Math, your friend.
Math. Not usually, but this time, yes. So they're having to go, so they would have had to go all the way, 1/6 of a mile, to ever go up the stairs to go anywhere. That logically doesn't make sense. And so for these companionways that are forward, it makes sense that they would be there, but people very rarely talk about them in the secondary sources, but it totally changes the Titanic story if you factor them in.
Okay. So no, but because the companionways in to the rear of Titanic for third class, that did not get them to decks where there were lifeboats. Lifeboats, correct?
None of them did.
None of them. Okay.
None of them did.
Right. So
But
here they're saying that they got their quote said that they had gotten up to the
where he says, we better get up. We too went up on deck in the
Yes.
forward part of the ship.
yes.
So when they're saying on deck, they are going on deck up to shelter deck C. They are on the forward well deck, which is the other quote unquote third class open promenade.
Okay.
Yes. So when the aft companionway goes all the way up to shelter deck C, the aft well deck.
Okay.
Yes.
So, but neither one is going to get you to a lifeboat.
Neither one is getting
That
you to a
doesn't make a
lifeboat.
whole lot of sense, but
No.
Okay.
But this whole forward companionway thing is absolutely crucial, and it changes the whole way that you think about the story from this point on.
Okay.
So that forward companionway leads actually up to the open space on Saloon Deck D.
Okay.
And then if you keep going up, it leads to the forward well deck on Shelter Deck C.
Okay.
Okay.
Very good.
Now, this is the downfall of me being a literal person, because when all of these sources, and I do mean all of them, say there is one third class companionway, I took that to the bank. I was like, there is one staircase, and that really sucks for them. So, but then realizing, oh my gosh, no, there aren't. Maybe there's the one main, but that does not mean that there are not smaller ways for them to be able to move about in the forward bit of the ship.
Gotcha. And I've also wondered if when they're referring to decks, do they really know the name of the deck they were on?
Oh, we're gonna get into,
I mean, I know that's just something that.
Well, he just said that, didn't he just say that he was on deck C? He was forward on deck C? There's absolutely no way that he was berthed forward on deck C.
So so the communication could be there could be miscommunication,
Right.
Because they just didn't know specifically where they were.
Right. And there's, like we were talking about, some people talk about, they refer to decks with different names or different letters, or maybe they were in like the compartment C, but compartment C was on a different deck. Like, there's a lot of different nomenclature on the ship.
Gotcha. So picking back up with Olaf, both he and Adolf ignored the steward's advice and chose instead to warn their fellow traveling companions. Olaf went to the cabin shared by Peter and Sigurd, and Adolf made his way down the length of the ship towards the aft cabins to warn Karen Marie and Anna. Third-class passenger Karen Marie Albaceth was one of the girls traveling with the Olaf Albaceth group. She was only 16 years old. After the Carpathia arrived in New York, Karen wrote the following letter to her father, quote, "Sunday evening we went to bed at about 10. At 12 o'clock, they came down to wake us up. I didn't know what it meant when Adolf Humblin stood in front of my bed and said I must hurry up because we hit an iceberg. When we had come out of the corridor, many people had already got up and were dragging their suitcases along. Dear you at home, had you only known how terrible it was. I hardly managed to stand. Sigurd had to stand and hold me. Oh, Sigurd, he isn't here, he who was so kind to me. I've almost cried to pieces, but it doesn't help at all."
I mean, 16 years old.
How terrifying
And
that
she
would
doesn't
be.
have her parents. She's just with this group of young people, you know, and so some returned to bed, satisfied by the steward's assurances that all was well. Others began investigating on their own. After being awoken by the collision, third-class passenger Charles Dahl did not waste any time trying to find a steward. Quote, "I was awakened by the ship crashing into the ice. I got up very much confused. I did not know where I was for the moment, as I had been awakened from a very sound sleep. I went up on the deck and saw a great quantity of ice scattered everywhere over the ship, but I could see no iceberg." So he does not talk about heading aft. He says he goes straight up on deck, so you would assume he went up by the forward companionway.
Yes. So, but in my mind, when I see went up on deck, my brain goes a deck, like with lifeboats. I'm thinking the upper. That's what I think of. So
Gotcha.
I'm glad you said that.
In terms of the third class, you cannot go there.
You
No.
cannot go there, and I'm glad you said that because that just changes the way that I
Yes.
think about this whole situation.
We need to think, and that's why I'm being so careful to think about how they were able to move through the space, because it is going to be crucial for the rest of the story.
Like I said, I still want to know why in the world they'd have them go to decks that have no lifeboats. I mean, that just makes
Well,
no
and they
sense.
fought it later in the inquiry when they were
Yes.
asking them, and they said, "Shouldn't you have lifeboats on that deck from now on?" They were still fighting it.
Wow. That's crazy. Third-class passenger Mary Minnie Coots, as well as her sons, William, 11, and Neville, 3, were traveling from London, England, to the home that Mr. William Coots had established for them in New York. Minnie, William Jr., and Neville were supposed to sail on a different steamship, but that voyage was canceled due to the coal strike. Their passages were then transferred to Titanic. So here's this coal strike again.
Yes.
So my understanding, if I remember correctly, the coal strike created a shortage, and then from there they transferred coal from certain ships to other ships, and so some were canceled, some ships were able to sail, some did not, or had
Exactly.
their voyage.
They had to stay in port, and they took all of the coal out of certain ships to be able to load up into like Titanic and maybe a couple others for them to be able to make the voyage.
Interesting. So yeah, that would have had a direct consequence of ships that did sail or did go on their voyage, and then those who didn't. People on the Titanic, they may have been on other boats.
A lot of them were, but it's interesting. We also talked about how Titanic was not completely full. She was sailing not at capacity. She was sailing not at capacity even after passengers were taken from other ships and put on her.
Interesting.
Yeah,
That's interesting. I didn't realize that. Continuing with Minnie, are quotes. She wrote this letter to a friend in England. Quote, "The accommodation on the Titanic, food, etc., was everything that could be desired. None of us were seasick, and one could hear on all sides people remarking what a splendid steamer she was and looking forward to joining their friends in New York. I was asleep when the ship struck. The crash was so slight that I thought little of it. I lay awake for fully 15 minutes. Presently, I could hear people opening their cabin doors and inquiring what was the matter, and some of the stewards assuring them that there was no danger. She would start again in a little while. However, I got up just to find out all about it. I was surprised to see foreigners carrying all their belongings, rugs, blankets, and even small trunks up on deck. The women were excited, that is, the foreigners. Children were crying, but in a short time they were all up on deck and everything was quiet again. The deck being 2 stories up, we could not hear what they were doing. I was standing in the corridor quite a long time trying to find out what really had happened, but everybody said there was no danger, and I never felt the least bit frightened. I thought it better not to go up on deck in case I might not be able to get down again. Then I woke Willie and told him there had been an accident, not to be afraid, and on no account to cry, even if we get drowned. I let Neville sleep as long as possible."
I'm just going to put this out here. I don't think
I
that I am all about a stiff upper lip, but
Yeah.
I think that might be taking it a bit far.
And that's, yes, for a child and saying, I
An
agree with you.
11-year-old?
Yeah, stiff upper lip. That is stiff upper lip.
Well, and you can definitely tell, the comments about foreigners, there definitely is kind of a sense of other. The other people are worried. The other people are making noise and fleeing. We don't necessarily have to. And this is kind of an attitude that you do see in certain passages,
Well, I mean, if with there being an event going on, to keep us a cool, level head is not a bad thing.
No,
So,
it's not. But it's also for the people that were scared. They have every right to be scared. So this is one of those things, is that historical documents, they're not always the most polite.
Well, yeah,
They
yeah.
are.
And it's and what we remember after the fact is always going to be different. I mean,
Yes.
that's the way we're wired.
Absolutely.
So and so even though Minnie overheard the steward saying there was no danger and could hear nothing, she still woke up her young and started prepping for whatever came next. So she was thinking, hey, there's
Yes.
something here.
Something's going on.
Something's going on.
So far, these accounts have been much like those that we heard from the first and second class passengers. However, the next few passengers that we hear from immediately knew that they were in danger because the evidence was pouring into their cabins. Third class passenger Daniel Buckley is a name that you might recognize. We heard from him during the aft starboard episode as he escaped in boat number 13. Now we will hear how he experienced the collision. Quote, "There were 4 of us sleeping in the same apartment. We had a bed of our own, and in every apartment there were 4 life belts, one for each person. At the time when the ship got struck, I heard a terrible noise. I jumped out of bed and told my comrades there was something wrong, but they only laughed. I turned on the gas, and to my surprise, there was a small stream of water running along the floor."
Oh, my goodness. And then there was third-class passenger Julius Sapp was immigrating to America to work as a farmhand in the sugar beet industry. He wrote this letter to his family in Belgium. Quote, "Around 12 a.m., I felt cold water coming into my bed. I was suddenly completely awake. I took my clothes and life belt. I ran to the other Belgians who were sleeping a bit higher. When I surprised them in their sleep, they couldn't believe my words when I told them that I thought the ship was sinking.
So what I'm assuming what he means by a bit higher is maybe on a higher deck.
Higher deck, that's what I was thinking. But to have water in your bed,
yes.
that would be a very I would not want to be on a ship and experience that. I don't care
what the steward tells me. If there's water coming into my bed, there's a problem.
Or a stream of water running along the floor. You shouldn't be seeing any water in your cabin.
Although on the floor, I would wonder, did somebody spill something?
Well, if it was a stream, I don't know.
A stream, that one doesn't imply it's coming from somewhere.
Right. So, and third-class passenger Theodore de Mulder was also from Belgium. He had a wife, 3 young children, and 2 elderly in-laws for which to provide. So he was traveling on Titanic to emigrate to Canada. After the disaster, Theodore wrote the following letter to his family in Belgium. Quote, happily and gladly, I let you know that I have been saved from a certain death and I'm in good health. However, my trip went on awfully, and no pen will ever be able to describe the fear and the horrible events I saw. It was around midnight that our ship collided with the iceberg. We jumped out of our beds, and oh my God, the water was already 4 feet high in our cabin. 4 feet?
4 feet.
Oh my goodness.
Which I'm trying to even picture, would that be up to the bottom of the highest bunk bed, do you think?
I would say the highest bunk bed, the base of that was probably about 5. So I would say the bottom one would have been in water, and then it was getting close to the upper bunk bed.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So first and second class passengers awoke to dry cabins and very little evidence that anything was wrong. They might have felt anxious, causing them to seek out the advice of the bedroom stewards, but they were far enough removed from the point of impact that any information they received was secondhand from other passengers, crew, officers, etc. The situation was drastically different for the third-class single men whose cabins were located near the bow on the starboard side of decks E, F, and G. Their berths were the closest to Titanic's split hull, and the evidence of disaster was literally pouring into their beds. The stewards could clearly not tell passengers whose rooms were filling with freezing seawater to go back to bed. Instead, the passengers were instructed to make their way down Scotland Road on Upper Deck E towards the stern.
Scotland Road.
Scotland Road.
Scotland Road. What is that?
It is a working crew passageway that it was nicknamed Scotland Road by the crew. It runs the entire length of the ship on the port side of Upper Deck E, and it was therefore one of the most direct routes from one end of the ship to the other. The crew had christened the 1/6 of a mile corridor Scotland Road after a major thoroughfare in Liverpool, England, which was the hometown for many of the crew, since that's where the White Star Line headquarters was located. So, Dad, since where we lived in California, the main freeway was the 101.
The one we stayed off because of all the bad traffic?
Pretty much. So it would be like if we had a really, really long hallway somewhere, we saw it, and we called it the 101.
Well, yeah, I get you, because there was, I understand. Was there only one Scotland Road? Was there only one 1/6 of a mile long?
There is only one Scotland Road.
So that was the only...
There's not one on a port side.
Okay, very good.
So the third-class passengers were accustomed to traveling along Scotland Road because it led to the stairs that descended into the third-class dining saloon on Middle Deck F.
Very good. Third-class passenger Joseph Abraham Hyman did not wake up to water in his cabin, but he was ordered to head aft down Scotland Road all the same. After listening to people running to and fro in the passageways for about 20 minutes, he, quote, got up and dressed and went out into the passage. A steward standing there told me roughly to go to the back of the ship, and I walked along the passage, which ran the whole length of the vessel. On the way, I passed a group of engineers and stokers laughing, chatting, and smoking cigarettes. So he's in the front. They're sending him all the way to the rear of Titanic.
Yes.
Interesting.
So this is so incredibly fascinating for me. So when I was under the impression that there was only one third-class companionway, this passage didn't raise any red flags. I didn't think anything of it. If there's only one egress, of course the stewards are going to be steering the passengers in that direction. However, now that we know that there was a forward companionway, now that we know that those men in the forward cabins would have used that forward companionway all the time to be able to get up into the upper, the open space or wherever else,
right.
The steward's orders just don't make sense.
No, why would they send them all the way to the back of the ship? I wonder if this had something to do with in an emergency trying to keep the third class away from the first and second, maybe,
that is certainly one of the arguments that we'll get there. His name is David. It's Give me a second.
That's
We'll
okay.
get there.
That's all right.
So, if the intent was to evacuate the third-class passengers to the open promenades on Shelter Deck C, why would the stewards have advised the single men berthed in the forward cabins to travel the entire length of the ship via Scotland Road and then ascend the main third-class companionway when they could have just directly accessed the forward companionway?
And that forward companionway is still third-class territory.
It is.
Right. So why
There
would
would have
they?
been no problem.
Interesting. I wonder if there were. Yeah, I'm wondering if it has something to do maybe with organization or structure or having some type of control over the situation more in the stern than in forward.
I think that you are right on so many of those points.
Oh,
So
okay.
there is a fantastic article by David. How would you pronounce this last name?
Gleicher?
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 Gleicher? I'm going to say Gleicher.
Gleicher. That sounds good.
Okay. There's a fantastic article by David Gleicher that addresses this exact question. It is very appropriately entitled The Fatal Journey of Third-Class Men on the Titanic, and it is linked under the sources list for this episode on theprimarynerd.com. The following quote is from Gleicher's work, and I very much recommend that y'all read the article in its entirety. It is pretty incredible. Quote, driven by fear, and in the case of those whose cabins were literally flooded by necessity, hundreds of men deep down on E, F, and G decks at the forward end of the ship now gather up, as best they can, their belongings and begin a journey in the depths of the ship, the near length of the Titanic from bow to stern. As suggested by the title of this piece, the journey proved a fatal one. The men, some 350 to 400 of them, went almost the entire way along the working alleyway known as Scotland Road that ran along the port side of E deck. It's not port side, I think. Wasn't it starboard side?
I thought, well, I'll put a pin in that.
We'll put a pin in that.
There's only one. I know
There's
that.
only one. So anyway, we'll put a pin in that.
Put a pin in that.
The journey was not completed probably for all of them until roughly 1 a.m. It ended in a deadly cul-de-sac. Virtually none of the third-class men who went back to the stern from their front quarters were ever rescued. Of the 420 men in the forward quarters, only 56 survived. Many, if not all of the survivors, most likely went immediately up to the forward boat deck, never taking the journey at all.
Which they should have done in the first place. I don't understand why they're having them go to the back of the boat.
So now I had assumed that the stewards pointed the men towards the stern because either A, that was the policy, or B, there was no policy, so the stewards sent the men towards the main third-class companionway because they didn't know how else to advise them. You know, maybe that's where their supervisors are. That I figured it's got to be one or the other.
Okay.
So, however, as Gleicher points out, there were Board of Trade regulations in place that required Titanic to have emergency routes by which all passengers, regardless of class, could access the lifeboats launched on the boat deck. Let me say that again. The Board of Trade regulation is that all passengers, regardless of class, have access to the lifeboats launched from the boat deck. But we know that that didn't happen.
No, and no matter whether if they went the forward companionways or the rear in third class, it wouldn't have gotten you to a deck that had lifeboats.
Nope. Edward Wilding, who designed both the Olympic and the Titanic, stated during the British Wreck Commissioner's inquiry that there were 3 emergency routes intended for third-class men housed in the forward quarters on decks E, F, and G. Number 1, they could ascend that forward companionway all the way to the forward well deck, and then climb exterior ladders to the boat deck. Number 2, they could ascend the forward companionway up to E deck, which is where Scotland Road is, travel along Scotland Road, exit through an emergency door, which is in or off of Scotland Road, climb a stairwell to D deck, which led to the first class reception room, and then ascend the first class grand staircase all the way up to the boat deck.
Okay.
Or number 3, they could ascend the forward companionway up to E deck, travel aft along Scotland Road, exit through an emergency door that led to the steward's stairway, climb this stairway to A deck, and then ascend the first class grand staircase to the boat deck.
So they did have emergency plans.
So there are emergency plans in place. That the stewards did not follow them raises even more questions.
Well, it makes me I wonder if they knew, because this was a crew that we had talked about earlier that a lot of people had never been on. They hadn't worked together. There wasn't a lot of cohesiveness. They may not have known the ship wasn't completed, so maybe there were placards or things that that weren't in place, or maybe
They hadn't even had a boat drill yet. They were supposed to have a boat drill. They never did. There's all kinds of safety protocol things that had just simply not happened yet on Titanic.
Right, so to be able to take all the people and direct them appropriately in an emergency, you better really understand what you're doing and have it drilled down.
Absolutely. So now, but this is a conversation that we are going to revisit during the crew episodes. We are going to listen to, I can think off the top of my head, 4 different men that when we talk about what they had to say, it's going to give us a much clearer picture of what they knew and how they chose to implement it.
Very good.
But I wanted to at least, we're still focusing on our passengers for now, what the passengers knew and when they knew it. And what they knew from the crew was to head aft, even though they knew that they had their forward companionway that they had used before.
Yes.
But in an emergency, wouldn't you follow what the crew tells you to do?
Oh, yes. Yeah, and you would think that they're the ones who know what to do. And these 3 points that you just told us about, there's quite a few steps here. I mean, you have to do this, do that, climb a ladder, do this. In some cases, people are climbing cranes. I mean, it's not just, follow the exit route, you get a lifeboat. I mean, this is make a left, make a right, turn around, stand on your head.
Yeah. So even if the third class men had been directed to these emergency routes, even if they had pointed and said, go through this door, open this door, and it will lead you to safety, there is a glaring problem. As Gleischer so adroitly points out, quote, both of the exits off Scotland Road in these last 2 routes were out of bounds to third-class passengers in usual circumstances, and for that reason, most of the men would not have been liable to take them and would not have known where each led in any case.
And if it was in English, would they have understood?
The
I mean,
language thing is going to be huge.
I mean, I've been in a foreign country that I did not speak the language, and I looked at the signs and thought, what is this? I didn't know. Unless I had my Google Translator, I couldn't tell what it said.
Well, and what they would have, so logically, it would not have been enough for the third-class men to be just directed to the emergency exits. They would have needed members of the crew to lead them along the entire emergency route.
And in that chaos, were there enough people to do that, especially with some of the crew actually getting on lifeboats?
But I will tell you is that we're going to talk about something very soon, that there are people that are stationed along a route and they are taking them, but it's only from the stern main companionway. It is not from the forward companionway.
Interesting. Okay. A little after midnight, while the third-class single men were slowly traveling aft along Scotland Road, the bedroom stewards stationed in the third-class areas near the stern began knocking on passengers' cabin doors with the order to put on lifebelts. Third-class passenger Ernest Persson was traveling to the United States because of his older sister, Elna. She had immigrated years before, but came back to Sweden with her 2-year-old daughter, Selma, to visit her family. His letter is as follows, quote, we departed Southampton on the 10th, and everybody was happy and content every day for food, and everything was the best we could wish for. But then the terrible night came. They woke us up at 12 a.m. and told us to enter the afterdeck because we hit an iceberg. Nobody believed there was any danger. The boat was unsinkable, as they said.
John Cribb and his 16-year-old daughter Laura were traveling as third-class passengers on Titanic. Laura wrote the following account for publication, quote, my father and I were traveling third class in order to save as much money as possible so he would have sufficient means to go into business when we reached this country. However, we were very comfortable. The first few days of the voyage were glorious, and we made many friends among the passengers who were coming to this country to start their lives new in what my father had always termed the land of promise. I was in my berth early Sunday night and was thrown violently to the floor by an impact of the boat when it struck the iceberg. It was then about 11:30, and for a moment I was so stunned that I was unable to imagine what had occurred until I heard one of the officers of the ship shouting that the boat had struck an iceberg. He gave hurried instructions that we should dress and go up on the second deck.
Right, so he actually told them that the boat had struck an iceberg.
Yes, they are being a lot more straightforward with the third class at sea in some circumstances.
And I was curious about when it comes to time. I mean, we had talked once before about the clocks were adjusted. There was a certain period of time that the ship's clocks were adjusted.
Yeah, so it was that midnight At midnight, there was like the two different watches and when the time changed. And so you would have had the master clock and it would have changed the other clocks. But then they've already admitted, they being the officers, have already been admitted that some of the clocks were changed and some of them weren't because they were so focused on the iceberg situation. Right. So it is interesting to hear all of these different times. It does seem pretty consistent between 11:30 and midnight.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm wondering, is like we have watches on our wrist, and I know that they had pocket watches. I'm not really quite certain if it's something that everyone had or would have paid attention to. It is a good question.
Did they have pocket watches? Were they looking at the clocks that were posted in the public areas? And if they were the clocks in the public areas, were they the ones that were reflected to the correct time, or were they the ones that had not yet been updated?
Yeah, and were they in the hall? Were these clocks in the hallways? I mean, could they look out their berth or their room and see a clock? I don't know.
I would assume that and this is just an assumption, I would assume that there would have been a clock near the stairs of the aft main companionway.
Right. Oh, I can see it being in public spaces. Right. I'm just wondering about the actual where their rooms were, down in those lowly corridors or quiet corridors.
I don't know, because we saw John Jacob Astor's pocket watch at the museum, but again, that's one of the richest men in the world had a pocket watch.
Right. So it makes me wonder these different things about time, and the fact that they're able to give a time is actually it's a ballpark. I would say after all this time. So. And according to these two accounts from Ernest and Laura, the stewards were telling the third-class passengers about the iceberg from the start. In our first and second-class episodes, the officers and crew only admitted to the iceberg when asked directly. These accounts show that the stewards were being fairly direct with the third-class passengers, but they are nothing compared to the next quote from third-class passenger Daniel Buckley.
This is one of my favorites.
After seeing the stream of water running along the floor of his shared cabin, Daniel was getting dressed when he heard the lifebelt order being hollered down the passageway. Quote, I'd only just dressed myself when the sailors came along shouting, all up on deck unless you want to get drowned. We all ran up on deck.
That is a man of few words. I'm here for it.
I was going to tell you, if I heard that, you better believe I'd be running. I'd throw on whatever I had around me.
Can you imagine being told this? It's, you're like, wait, what did he just say?
Well, I tell you, I'd rather have someone be very direct with me in a situation like that than blowing smoke.
That is true. Third-class passenger Gershon Cohen was an 18-year-old Londoner whose passage was transferred to Titanic because of the coal strike. After the sinking, Gershon wrote this letter describing how he survived. Quote, at 10:30, we were all sent to bed, lively shouting and singing and doing everything. At 11:45, we were awakened as about a dozen crewmen came by our decks. We did not take the slightest notice and went to bed again, but we were awakened by the sailors to put on life belts. I did not have any because I could not find one and was still making a lark of it, and people were singing and playing the piano. The band was also playing.
Oh, my goodness.
So it's not just the first and second class passengers who don't believe that Titanic can fatally sink. Also, the piano part of this quote makes me suspect that they are in the third-class general room on shelter deck C, unless maybe there was a piano in the third-class open space on saloon deck D.
And we had said this before, depending on how you felt the collision, depending on what you saw as evidence around you, depending on what you heard from people, you may have gone back to bed. You may have said, hey, you know what, it's freezing outside. I tell you right now, the people that had the water come in their cabins, that water was 28 degrees. We experienced that water at the Titanic Museum.
Oh, my goodness.
It burned and it ached. I mean, but on top of that, remember how cold that room was?
Yes.
Okay, so this was a good-sized room with the water in it, and that entire room was cold. So you had the cold outside. You would have had the cold in the compartments that were flooding. You would have had a lot of – that would have been – but for the people that experienced that would have had – they would have, had the observation of the evidence to get moving, but other people didn't know that.
Well, and at this point, the men that are coming down Scotland Road, they haven't even arrived yet. It's still too soon in the timeline. They don't know that there's actually water coming in. So when the stewards are coming around, knocking on the doors, telling them to get their life belts, they don't have any evidence besides being awoken at this time.
Interesting. Like I said, it would have depended on what people knew when they knew it, is what it came down to. So, speaking of not being able to find a life belt, third-class passenger Mary Minnie Coots was having a difficult time as well. Quote, it was only when I heard the order for life preservers that pulled Neville out of bed, put on his knickers and coat over his sleeping suit, and put on his boots. No time to lace them up. There were only 2 life belts in my cabin, and I put one on Willie and the other on Neville. By this time, some people were getting excited and running from one cabin to another looking for life belts. I mentioned to an officer that I had not got one, and he said he was afraid there weren't any more. I asked several other people if they knew of any to spare, but there weren't any. Nearly everybody was on deck now, and we were just going when I saw the same officer. I said to him again that I had not got a life preserver. He told me to follow him and ordered the few people still in the corridors up on deck. He took us through quite a number of corridors and passages right into the first-class saloons in his own quarters. There he got his own life belt and tied it on me, saying, "There, my child, if the boat goes down, you'll remember me." I asked him if there really was danger, and he said he was afraid there was.
So there's a couple things to unpack here. Firstly, the only reason that Minnie got the life belt she needed is because an officer went the extra mile and personally led her and the children up to his own quarters and gave her his personal life belt. Does this mean that there were not extra life belts in storage somewhere? Like, where's the protocol and the procedure here?
Yeah, I would think there should be one for every passenger.
Well, and if it's a 4-person berth, why aren't there 4 life belts?
Mm-hmm. There should be.
Also, I'd like to point out that in the United States Senate Inquiry Report, there is the very simple statement, there was ample lifebelt equipment for all. But from these accounts, was there?
The question is, was there, or was it that they were not in a place where they could be found, or they had not all been put out, or, any number of things could have happened.
I remember in one of our previous episodes where another passenger couldn't find them and they were either like up on a cabinet or they were under the bed. They were somewhere not obvious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you would think that there should be something in the room. Hey, here's your life belt. Mm-hmm. You put it, in case of emergency, here it is. So,
right.
But then again, you think about it. How many times have you flown and they talk about that life preserver that's under your seat? Have you ever seen it?
No,
I
never.
haven't. Have you ever gone looking for it?
No. Do you know how much gum is probably under there? I do not want to be rifling underneath an airplane chair.
Yeah. So if I'm on a plane and it ends up in a lake or a river, or a body of water that I need to float in something, I don't know where it is.
No, I don't either.
I've never seen it. So I don't know. Maybe here on this ship, or the boat, they just didn't think of it and they didn't see it. Mm-hmm. I don't know. So third-class passenger Eugene Daly had initially followed the steward's advice and returned to bed. However, he soon began investigating for himself. Quote, I went back for a little while. Then I went up on deck as I heard a noise there. People were running around. Then I went down and went to the room where Maggie Daly and Bertha Millville were. I went for a life buoy in the stern, and Maggie and Bertha came with me. I had a scuffle with a man for a life buoy. He would not give it to me. But he gave it to me. But he gave it to Maggie Daly. Oh, he would not give it to me, but he gave it to Maggie Daly. Well, that's...
So now we're literally seeing passengers fighting over life belts.
Yeah, that is... Yes, there's... Well, as the night progresses,
mm-hmm.
It is going to deteriorate.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that we already know. We already know something's happened. But so there's a few things you've told me about that I was startled to hear. So we'll get there.
So after grabbing their life belts, if they could find them, the third-class passengers poured out of their cabins into the hallways and congregated in one of 2 places: at the foot of the main third-class stairway on upper deck E, or out on shelter deck C, either on the aft well deck, which would have been back near the poop deck, mm-hmm. or the forward well deck, which would have been, both of which operated like open promenades for the third-class passengers. According to Walter Lord, those who remained below on upper deck E were, quote, waiting for instructions from above, while the bedroom stewards adjusted the lifebelt straps and assured them that there was no need to worry. Word gradually spread that the Titanic had hit an iceberg, but the first truly alarming development came when the single men, driven from the bow by the rising water, swarmed aft and joined the crowd milling around the stairs. Many of these men carried satchels and bundles, sopping wet from the seawater that had swirled into their quarters.
Oh, my goodness.
So these are our third-class single men who have now traveled all the way down Scotland Road. Mm-hmm. And their dramatic arrival at the stern was the first indication that something might really have happened to the ship. And here the passengers were forced to wait for instructions.
And here they're bringing their wet satchels and bundles, sopping wet with seawater, so people are seeing evidence that there is something.
Yes.
Something definitely is wrong. So that
and this is something that has stayed consistent, is mm-hmm. that the third-class passengers in the forward quarters were dragging darn near all of their possessions to the stern. Mm-hmm. And so people talk about them sitting here while they're waiting. They're just sitting on their bags.
Interesting. So there's no talk of any kind of crew members getting them together or instructions. Nothing at this
There's
point.
nothing telling them, hey, you guys are not going to be allowed to take that with you if you're getting in a boat.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, well, yeah, because if you're getting a lifeboat,
you're not taking that with you.
You're not taking your luggage with you. That's for sure. Wow. However, not all third-class passengers were waiting below decks. As we've already established, a number of passengers had already gone up on deck to investigate the collision. We've already heard from third-class passenger Charles Dahl, who went to investigate the collision for himself and found, quote, a great quantity of ice scattered everywhere on shelter deck C. He recorded, quote, I believe there was a ship near us. I saw a light low down on the water and said, that is the light of a ship. Others thought it was a star, but I still believe that I was correct. I was first in our boat to see the light of the Carpathia, and when I saw it and told the rest that the ship was coming, they again argued that I only saw a star. But the lights in both instances were the same, and that convinced me there was a ship on which could have seen our signals of distress.
So this quote ties in with the great, was it the Californian or was it a different ship mystery? We've talked about with a lot of the first and the second class passengers that they saw a light. What is this light? Is it a ship? Are they coming? Are they coming to rescue us? Is it the Olympic? So the third class passengers saw this too.
Mm-hmm. And, in that area, how many ships were in that area? The Californian was in the area.
I mean, the map that I'm picturing in my head, there's probably 6 ships at play.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Now, granted, of differing, lengths or distances away from Titanic, but there's probably about 6 ships, I would say.
I didn't know. I always thought I just always thought it was either Californian or the Carpathia.
But there's also been this big debate. Is it a mystery schooner? Is it this fishing ship? Because a lot of people, it's really interesting. They don't want it to be the Californian. They really don't want it to be the Californian. And so they'll make all these really interesting arguments about how it can't possibly be. And don't worry, that'll be a whole thing.
Yeah, well, I certainly would hope whatever it is, a big enough ship for what, 2,200 people?
I mean, bottom line,
Scooter's not going to cut it.
No. Bottom line, there was some sort of vessel with a light that was out there the night the Titanic sank that never got any closer to them and did not save them.
Well, several people have mentioned that.
Yes.
So yes, I see. That is a mystery.
So the last time we heard from third-class passenger Olas Abelseth, he and Adolf had gone down below deck to warn the rest of their traveling companions. The entire group then climbed back up to shelter deck C, where Olas also saw a light. Quote, when we came back again, we became aware of a light out on the ocean. One of the crew came up and said we could be at ease because it was the light from an approaching ship. We thought we saw the light and ship, but that was a mistake. He probably meant the ship that brought us to New York, but it was 6 o'clock in the morning before she arrived. So it cannot be the light of the Carpathia.
No, Carpathia is too far away.
She did not arrive near the wreck site until 6 a.m. or so. So again, maybe the Californian?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know anything about that. So I'm just going to
gotta just keep cruising.
Have to rely on your knowledge of what you know about that. So
I will tell the story when the moment is right.
When the moment
I
is
assure you.
Very good.
But this is another example of a passenger thinking that they will be saved soon.
Yeah, and so here you have the unsinkable ship. You have differing ways that people experience the collision, differing evidence that is presented to them. And then you have
advice given to them.
Advice given them. And then you also have things that are seen that they're thinking that help is nearby for a ship that can't sink. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of different mindsets going on that night.
One of the things that the David Gleicher article said, a couple other things I thought was fascinating. So them bringing their belongings back to the stern. He had kind of put this idea out there. What if the third-class men grabbed their belongings because they thought that she wouldn't be able to take on any additional water? So they were grabbing their stuff just to go into the stern because they thought they were going to bunk up with other third-class passengers and until another ship came to pick them up.
Actually, that I can see the logic behind that, especially with the different the compartments that were designed to keep her afloat. I could see that if so many of them flooded, then the ship would stay afloat, get out of that area, and go.
Let them close it off or do whatever they're going to do.
Close those watertight doors and go bunk with someone else. No, I can. That actually makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
It does make a lot of sense.
So it's the journey of the men down Scotland Road is such a footnote in Titanic history. A lot of historians don't even talk about it at all. But it just kind of, there's something about it that's just kind of bugging me. And trust me, we're going to get into it more, not just about the Scotland Road, because now they're here. They're at the base of the stairs. But this whole, who is allowed to climb the stairs? Where are they allowed to climb the stairs? This whole question, there's just something weird about it. And trust me, I have done a ton of research.
Yes, I'm.
Dad well knows. He has the emails to prove it.
Yes, I will know that. So
we will be getting into that.
Very good. So as a wrap up, here where we are, there are some third-class passengers still gathered in the foyer of the third-class companionway on Upper Deck E, waiting for further instructions. There are some who have already gone back to bed. There are some who went up to the aft well deck to investigate and are watching the mystery ship off in the distance. There are some who looked for another way up to the boat deck. So it sounded to me like it's going to be a labyrinth to get up to where there actually are lifeboats.
Yes.
So it's going to be interesting to find out how that transpires. So, and with that, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. Anything else you wanted to add before housekeeping?
I could just keep going and going, but we need to at least let you guys be able to end this episode and, get some water and think about what it is that we've said and be ready, because the next episode is we're going to keep on with the third class. We're going to talk about the big question. That's right. We're going to talk about gates. Are there gates in third class? Where were those gates? Were they locked? And what happened to those passengers? And how were they finally able to make it to the boat deck?
I'll tell you what, while I'm doing the housekeeping here, why don't you find out the Scotland Road, if it's starboard or port? Why don't you take a quick look at that? So we'd love to hear from you. We have gotten some feedback from our listeners, and we absolutely love it. We love questions. We love ideas for future episodes, or any questions you have about the Titanic, anything we've said or anything you want to add. So you can reach out to us at the primarynerdpodcast@gmail.com. You also can listen to the previous or the latest 3 episodes of our podcast at theprimarynerd.com, and you can leave a comment there, which actually will forward to the email as well. You can listen to our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and you can also hear it on our website. And we have our new YouTube channel, the Primary Nerd Podcast, which we are going to start now that I've got some of the technology up and running and it works. We'll get more of our rabbit trails
I'm
and
excited.
rants. Oh yeah. It's a whole different ballgame for me.
Well, and the
It's very
format
cool.
is going to be totally different.
Yes.
So this is a lot more formal. It's more scripted because we need to be able to give you guys the quotes, the context, and the citation. So important to have all the citation. Where the YouTube channel is going to be a little bit more casual. It is going to be talking about the things that we've learned and the things that excite us, and a little bit more impromptu, I think is the way that I would put it.
Yeah.
And it is on the port side. The working crew passageway is on the port side.
On the port side. So
Indeed.
it's on the same side where we're wrapping up the lifeboat launching.
It is. So
on the port. Very good.
The ship struck on the starboard. Scotland Road is on the port.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that. So we can unpin that.
Yes. We can take out of all the pins we have, that one can go away.
So until next time,
I'm Courtney.
I'm Brian.
And this is The Primary Nerd.